So now in this video, you'll be learning how motion in a plane actually happens. Okay. Now consider, see, you have x-axis, you have y-axis. Okay. Now consider you have some point P. Now, do you remember in vectors we did position vector, displacement vector and all these things? Right. Now position vector was from the origin to that particular point. What is the vector? Right. That was basically your position vector. Now in this case, you have some point P, then from O to P we'll write a vector, right? So let's call that vector as vector R. Now vector R will become the position vector, correct? That's where point P is situated, right? So that's your position vector. Now see, let's say the point moved in this direction. Okay, as you can see, the point is moving in this direction. Now see, once the point is moving, what we'll see is if a point is moving, it should have a velocity, right? So it has a velocity. Let's say the velocity is v. Now before we go on to velocity and what is velocity, let's try to define how motion in a plane happens. Okay. Now if motion in a plane is happening, we need to have x and we need to have y. There should be change in both x and y, correct? Then only we say motion in two dimension or motion in a plane. Now, from this point P, let's say it's moving to point Q. Okay, now in this point Q, see, I'm moving a very small value of x and a very small value of y, correct? So let's call that small value as delta x and the small value of y as delta y. Okay. Now from P to Q, we are moving delta x and delta y. Now the position vector of Q. Now if you are trying to calculate the position vector now, so OQ we have to calculate. Call that as R dash. Okay, call that as R dash. Now in this particular scenario, your point P is at position vector R. Correct? So when we are talking about position vector in an xy plane, so I can represent this in terms of x component and y component. Remember resolving of vector we did, right? So as you can see, this is how we resolve a vector, correct? So R is your position, or basically that's the resultant. Now we need to take it in terms of x component and y component. So x component, call it as xi, and y component, call it as yj. Okay, xi plus yj. Remember I cap, j cap and k cap we did, right? So same thing here also comes. So your position vector R is xi plus yj. Now position vector R dash, that is OQ, that becomes x dash I plus y dash j. Correct? Now see, the difference between that R dash and R, that is basically the delta x and delta y value, correct? So we call that as the displacement vector delta R. Understood, right? So displacement vector delta R. So now, basically delta x becomes x dash minus x and delta y becomes y dash minus y, correct? Because the change in the position is a very small change, right? Understood so far? So basically what we did was just the position, the change in the position. Whenever change is happening, that's where a motion in two-dimensional plane is happening. Correct? Understood? So delta x and you have delta y. So basically based on this, we define what is velocity. We define what is acceleration. Okay? So in the next video, you will be learning about what and how velocity is defined using these terms.